icebreaker speech is From Farm Fields to Airfields. So, how many of you have recalled the movie, remember that I Love Lucy episode where Lucy and her friend were packaging chocolates in a chocolate factory? You remember the one where the line sped up and they couldn't keep up. Well, that's how I felt, only I was performing a similar task, not chocolates, but I was packaging Crest toothpaste in Iowa City, Iowa. The line didn't speed up for me like it did for Lucy and her friend, but I did find myself longing for something different. So I thought about my options. I knew I wanted to travel and that I loved airplanes. I decided that the military offered everything I needed, including a job in aviation, travel, and security. So I enlisted in the Air Force at the age of 20. The first step in my new aviation career was basic military training, also known as boot camp. Picture the movie Forrest Gump, if you need a visual. Boot camp has two major components, one physical, one mental aspect. I'm going to tell you about both, including the challenges and the rewards of each. I arrived at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas on a Sunday night at 10 p.m. The actual arrival was not as much of a shock to my system as when we woke up. We were abruptly woken the next morning at 4:30 a.m. when myself and 29 other women were told to go out of bed. Little did I realize this was the beginning of the mental work needed to ensure each recruit was able to fulfill their commitment. The mental work was unexpected for me, as I was a little naive to just how much of the program was centered on this. The technical instructors, also known as TIs, were very astute at ensuring that we focused on the task at hand, which was the transition from civilian to military life. The TIs would single out a person, try to make this say something without first addressing them by title, and when we would nervously succumb to their intimidation, they would get in our face, ultimately embarrassing us and making others extremely grateful they were not the one being called out. Another memorable event occurred when one of the TIs knocked my big gray metal locker over during an inspection because the hangers weren't spaced exactly as required. It was quite embarrassing, and it took all I had not to burst out laughing, because sometimes I do that when I get nervous. Thank goodness I held it in. Communication with the outside world was only through letter writing during those 6 weeks. You see, there was no internet or cell phones at that time, and TV was a privilege not allowed. There were payphones, and we were allowed to call home one 10-minute phone call a week. That first call home was a tough one, though. I am quite sure my parents knew that I was missing them, as they sensed the tears just behind my shaky voice. Then there was the constant threat of being recycled, or worse, washed out. Recycled was the least humiliating of the two. If you weren't cutting it, you would be pulled from your squadron and forced to start all over with a group of newbies at the beginning of their 6 weeks. If you were washed out, however, that was a complete discharge from the military because you just weren't cutting it. And we had one of each in our squadron. The physical component was not really that tough. We had physical training every day except Sundays, also known as PT. It included the standard jumping jacks, sit-ups, push-ups, and running. But there was an obstacle course at the end of the final week of training, and I didn't fall in the water. I did make it over the wall, and I even finished the 1.5 mile in the allotted time. Marching from point A to point B was perhaps the hardest part of the physical aspect of the military. Keeping in step with each other, meaning everyone leading with the same foot at the same time, and then staying in a straight line, it's a lot harder than you might think. I became quite skilled at the skip step, which is where you hop on one foot twice to get back in step with the others. And I'd show you right now how to do that, but I got heels on and I'd fall. And needless to say, there was no shuffling allowed. The feeling of completion was perhaps the greatest reward of all. Making it through that 6 weeks of mental anguish and physical challenges was the greatest feeling I had ever experienced. I finished basic training a much stronger person, both mentally and physically. The bonds I created during that time with the women in our squadron were genuine. We knew who we could trust, depend on to have our back, and also who we could share a laugh with. Looking back, joining the Air Force was a very good choice for me, as it gave me the solid foundation I needed to embark on such a fascinating career in aviation. Aim high.